and then all of a sudden, quote unquote, out of blue, this individual started hitting somebody next to them, okay? It wasn't necessarily to gain access to anything. It wasn't to get them to go away from them, but it seemed to kind of happen out of the blue. And sometimes that points more towards that sensory category, that there are things happening internally that cause that behavior because the individual isn't doing it to get anything else out of it, okay? So by answering questionnaires like this, we can start our process in really narrowing down why a behavior is occurring. There are other forms similar to this, something called the Functional Assessment Screening Tool, the FAST, and there's obviously a variety of others that are used. But if you'd like more information on them, you can look further into our handout and our PowerPoint online. Okay, so that's one way that we gain information for those indirect measures, aside from just having basic interviewing questionnaires with people who work with the individual or caretakers. The other way is conducting ABC data, okay? There are a variety of ways that we can conduct ABC data. There are some data sheets within this section, and I would like you to refer to those because they'll give you up-close examples of taking ABC data. But the first type of sheet we have is what's called anecdotal data, okay? Anecdotal just means that you're literally writing things down, okay? Anecdotal data is going to be placed in antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So again, going back to our ABCs of behavior that we had at the beginning, what happened immediately before the behavior? What was the behavior? And then what happened after, right? Okay. You guys remember this from before. If you forgot about taking ABC data and what that looks like, I urge you to go back in our training to our first module and review our ABCs again. So we have our anecdotal data. Another way that we can take data is using something like a functional assessment observation form. Okay, so this is a type of scatter plot where we can write the times of the day down here or parts of a day like periods in school. And then as events occur, our targeted behaviors, we can plot them in, okay? This takes a little bit more in-depth training to use. So if this is something that you come across, you can expect to have more training on this data taking piece from your supervisor or the BCBA on the case. Because it does get a little tricky. You can practice it at home. If you're interested in seeing more, I can put an online video that shows exactly how to use the FAOF or Functional Assessment Observation Form for your own knowledge, okay? But for the purposes of this training, we're going to move on. Here's another type of scatterplot data sheet. This one again sets the times of the day as well as the settings, and then we have the dates across here, and you're literally just supposed to check off how many times the targeted behavior of concern occurred during that time on that day. And scatter plots are beneficial because what we can do as behavioral analysts is then look and see, oh, I do see a little bit of a trend. You know, all of these behaviors seem to be occurring in the morning. Maybe during the first activity, right before breakfast. Maybe we should really see if this kiddo is hungry, and that's one of the reasons why they're aggressing before snack is being presented, right? It could be one of the things that we might conclude from here. Or maybe all of a sudden we look at this and behaviors are only occurring during seated work time. So then when we really assess the data, it might show that this individual is engaging in the behavior to escape or avoid work, okay? But you can see why it takes a really well-trained RBT to be able to put in good data so that when we start to really sum our data and take a peek at it, we get valid measures, and it's an accurate reflection or portrayal of the individual's real behavior, what's really occurring, okay? So once that direct data is summed, generally we sum data, we ask it to be taken for a consecutive amount of days, at least 5 days. Can you guess why? The idea is that we all have good and bad days, right? So we've got to kind of take multiple days and take the average of those to really get a better portrayal of what's occurring. Ideally, we would collect data across multiple weeks, but sometimes based on the severity or the need of the case and the behavior, we collect a smaller period of data so that we can put in a plan faster than sooner than later. So along with that direct data that you collect as an RBT or the teacher collects and you help support them, the behavioralist on the case is going to take some direct data as well, most likely ABC data. They're going to come in and directly observe the individual, take notes, and record their own data, and then include that in the report. So we're going to just briefly go through the functional behavioral assessment so you can have an idea of what that looks like and how we use that to inform a behavioral intervention plan. So hopefully you have your FBA in front of you. Again, Child A. So on our first page here, we're going to have an overview, gives you some background information about the client, maybe why an FBA was requested, why it's really important and socially significant for this individual we're working with. And then it's going to tell you the sources of data, where we got our numbers from, basically. So here, case and review of record for background knowledge. We interview the child's mother and grandmother in regard to behavioral concerns. And then ABC data was taken by the parents as well as the behavioralist, and a functional assessment screening tool was conducted. That's in the form of our interview format there to also assess the data, okay? Then on the second page, it outlines the targeted behaviors concerned. So we have physical aggressions and then obsessive compulsive behaviors that interfere with their ability to complete tasks. These were the two priority behaviors chosen. You can understand why these are incredibly socially significant for this child. Because A, physical aggressions are unsafe for them and to others around them. And then the obsessive compulsive behavior interferes with their ability to participate like a normal person day to day. Okay? This individual, like for example, couldn't go to the bathroom without rocking in and out of the bathroom doorway 20 times. And if for some reason they were interrupted, they would physically aggress to another individual. Or they would have a really hard time walking by things that weren't exactly in place, and they would have to go back and put it just so it was facing the right direction or on a right angle, and if anyone was in their way, they would plow them over. Not on purpose, but just because they were in their way and so intent on getting to that item. So that's why we chose those two targeted behaviors for concern. Then it goes through some relevant background information here, kind of like a regular psychology report would. As well as a contextual analysis. So this contextual analysis is going to be really that direct observation that the behavioralist does, and where they summarize exactly what they saw this individual engaging in. This has a rather long contextual analysis. And then we start to really analyze our data, and we take it apart and we put it into two categories. Antecedent triggers, things that are likely to come right before the behavior, and then consequences. What happens immediately afterwards, or why is the behavior occurring? Okay, so from our antecedent triggers, here we've got, again, our results for physical aggressions and then OCDs. Data showed that there was a total of 11 instances of aggressions. Out of the 11 total instances, 11 or 100% of the instances were preceded by a demand or request of the child. And then for obsessive compulsive behavior, data showed that out of 12 instances, 10 or 84% of them occurred when there was a demand placed on the child. And out of the 12, 1 or 8% was preceded by being denied access to an item. And then the other 1% was when the child was alone. Okay, so there are multiple things occurring right before. So this is helpful because then you can start to think when you're writing a behavioral intervention plan, okay, what things do I need to be wary of? Or maybe what can I alter or change in the environment so this individual is no longer coming in contact with those antecedents or those things that are likely to elicit a behavior. Okay? And then we get into the functions of our behavior. And this is our hypothesis as to why the behavior is occurring. So we've got physical aggressions. Results from data during the direct observation across 2.5 hours showed that there were a total of 2 recorded instances pushing or bulldozing through caretakers. Immediately after bulldozing through caretakers, child was given attention in the form of being told, no, you can't have that right now, and gained access to desired items. So that was just one part. Again, it goes into obsessive compulsive behavior. And then it also goes into direct observations from the ABC data that are included in here. But from that statement, we can hypothetically conclude that aggressions are occurring in order to gain access to items, right? And there might be possibly an attention maintained element too, because they're getting attention immediately after they engage in aggression. And so that will be displayed here as well in graphs. So it'll show you functions of the aggressive behavior and functions of the OCD type behavior. Typically, most functional behavioral assessments will include graphs, just because it's a nice addition and component that visually helps you understand the breakdown and likelihood of why a behavior is occurring or what things might elicit a behavior. Okay? All right. Then, of course, there's going to be a behavioral summary that just summarizes everything, the antecedents to the behavior, the things that are likely maintaining it, and why it's occurring over time. And then at the end of our report, we'll have goal recommendations. You know how you guys are contracted for a certain number of hours to work on a case? Typically, it comes from these recommendations. They're based on our thoughts of, all right, how much service does this kiddo really need to be able to reach their goals in decreasing these behaviors? Ideally, that would be enough, but sometimes, we take into consideration other variables as well. What is the school looking for? How many hours are realistic for them? Or if there's financial concerns, how many hours are going to be adequate for this family? Or, if the family is super stressed and has a lot going on, maybe they can only have us in their home for a few hours a day. So even though we would like to provide them with around-the-clock services, they can only handle 3 hours a day, right? So we would say, okay, fine, 3 times 5, 15 hours. 15 hours a week for an ABA therapist or a BT to be in the home, and then maybe 3 hours for a behavioralist to consult per week. So once we have our FBA, we can then write a behavioral intervention plan, okay? Behavioral intervention plans are all going to differ depending on the FBA, or at least they should. There are no cookie-cutter behavioral intervention plans. So the behavioral intervention plan that you have in front of you is a home-based behavioral intervention plan. So what I would ask you to do is take a peek at it. It's a little lengthy, so I hope that you had time to read it beforehand, because I'm not going to go through it word by word, otherwise we would be here all day. But I want to go over some key components, okay? So again, your behavioral intervention plan is going to outline the targeted behaviors. It's going to outline triggers or antecedents to the behavior that were found, as well as outline functions of the behavior or consequences, why it's occurring. Once we go through that part, we then sit down with the parents or staff members at school administration and we say, all right, what are going to be those pivotal behavioral goals that we need to teach or we need to use functional communication training with to replace the behavior with more appropriate behaviors? So again, we're going to prioritize, using a variety of different considerations as we do so, to figure out what's going to be most important first. For this kiddo, as you can see, we've got using a PECS book to communicate using a 2-word phrase, requesting using a break when needed, increased variety of